Here's the keyed beam, new wood and old wood. You can start to see what's happening. So what I'm trying to do is give you a bit of a taste of the stuff that's possible. Here's the keyed beam installed with a couple of big corbels underneath it. Corbels are a great way to increase capacity in a building. If you were going to use stirrup plates like we did in this building here, somebody did in this building, and the tenon had failed, putting a corbel underneath that post to tie beam connection would be fantastic. If we no longer have any shear strength in a connection, shear strength is this strength going through something. We can put corbels under stuff to great capacity. Very cheap way to deal with problems. So this little, I don't think it's going to run. Sometimes, so we do a lot of scanning now. We do a lot of computer-generated stuff. Sometimes we create models for how things go together. This is us hand-raising this particular building. Those are shear legs that are 33 feet tall that will allow us to tip up this 24-foot tall bent that weighs 6,000 pounds. And that's something like 70 people involved in this hand-raising. So I do hand-raisings as demonstrations. We do them as teaching aids, and I do them out of necessity when I work in places that I can't get a crane or a machine. And that's that finished building. You can see the key beam in the background here. Covered bridges, I'm not going to delve deeply into this, but it's a very similar scenario. And in covered bridges, one of the main things that we deal with is camber failure. And with camber failure, what ends up happening is the bridge sags in the middle. Similar scenarios that we deal with barns. But again, scarf joint repairs on the bottom chord, reinforce camber. So we lift the bridge back up a couple of feet, reinstore camber to it. It's the same thing we do with a barn. Purlin plate is sagging. I lift it back up, maybe put camber in it. What's camber? That's the opposite of, yeah, we're putting a little bit of pitch in it so that when it settles, it pushes out. That's how bridges work. Round barn, this is the one in Greentown that I think we did 10 or 12 years ago. It was pretty bad, of course, and it needed some stuff. And so we took it apart and put it back up. And we did this one mostly with similar technology. We didn't really make a lot of changes to it. I reinforced the mid-span plates, the laminations. You know, one of the main problems with round barns, there's two problems with round barns. One, most, if not any, of the documents I see from the 19th century have a nailing schedule for the laminations. There might be a hint at a nailing schedule. The laminations aren't nailed enough. What's the number one thing I have to do in a round barn? Go and nail all of the rings. All of them. Nail them and screw them all. Because if they weren't nailed enough, which I guarantee 90% of the time they weren't, the nails are rusted. And they're especially rusted at the midspan because that's where the pitch change is. And if you put shingles on it, again, which I don't like, then you're going to have water getting up underneath that. And what's the problem? The main problem with laminations is it's a great place to hold water. It's a great place to hold water. So re-nailing those plates, all the plates, is a big part of what we do. The other thing that's left out quite often are the lateral connectors. Lateral connectors are something maybe we should cover in a workshop. But it's one of the number one easy things to do on buildings that provide stability. But they need lateral connectors, and we'll talk about it a little bit on the Littleton Round Barn. But rebuilding the plate rings stronger is what we did on the Greentown barn. Otherwise, everything else was the same. So I do a lot of log work too, and so I just included a few because, you know, there are log barns out there, and we restore those. We move a lot of them. They're fairly easy to deal with, but surprisingly time-consuming for the little things that they are. There's a lot of wood in them, and the joinery is not terribly complex, but they take a fair bit of time. And they can be in pretty rough shape, and we can turn them back into things like this. I've done 30 or so log buildings now across the U.S., mostly in the Midwest. But it involves replacing a lot of timbers in the walls. And if they have, you know, many of them are this situation that you know, they were fine until 1976 when somebody decided to take them apart and move them downtown to the park, and then they didn't do anything with them for the last 30 years, and so they started to rot. And so that's a a lot of the work we deal with log buildings. So I'm going to do a quick case study on a 3-bay barn. This is a lift, new foundation, new siding. I wanted to show a little bit about how a lift is done. So we've got a couple of timbers underneath, or a couple of pieces of steel underneath this building, and reframed this lower wall on this bank barn. And now what I do, I started doing this about 15 years ago. I don't take the siding off anymore. I leave it on. And I re-nail it, and I use all stainless steel nails for everything. So I use stainless steel ring shank nails, and I re-nail all the existing siding on the building, patch it in if needed, fur it out with 1x furring strips using treated lumber for the first 8 feet from grade. Or, here's a great thing, 2x. I'll go around the whole building with 2x. And now, if I've got a whole wall where the outside 2 inches of the wall girts are rotten because the siding is bad, I can use structural screws to grab some purchase, and I don't have to replace all these girts because they look fine from the inside. But they won't hold a nail to hold siding. We need to find a way to have something on the outside of the building that will hold siding. So 1x or 2x around the perimeter is what you see here. Take the battens off, go over it with new siding, like that, and paint it. So that's board and batten with square edge battens. And then painted red eventually. So a little bit about trusses. Trusses can be undersized. And we do drawings for this as well. We do the engineering for this stuff. So if you know of a courthouse that needs repair, let me know. I can help them out probably. I was able to save this building from being decapitated by simply going in and restoring the integrity of the trusses from the inside, which involved a lot of drawings, some engineering, a lot of board meetings, a lot of convincing the county board that they don't have to decapitate the oldest courthouse in Illinois, which is what they were going to do. They were going to cut the top off this building and put steel trusses on. I was able to do all of my repair work for $250,000. Otherwise, the county was going to spend $600,000 to take the top off this Greek Revival building, put steel trusses on it, and vinyl siding. So these are the wins that I like, the way I approach barn restorations. And big ones, too. This is a 140-foot long hay barn, 24-foot sidewall, 48 feet wide. Did this one 25 years ago, and it looked like that when I started. Definitely everybody in the Forest Preserve wanted it torn down. So I went in and just framed them a new wall, and we did that mostly by doing scarf joints. So the whole wall of your building is bad, it's not gone. I just scarf on new post to tie beam connections, frame a new wall, and put siding on it, and we leave the other 3/4 of your building. North wall, south wall, you know, either the sun or the lack of sun, you know, destroys one side of a building or the other. And new siding, decking only where needed. Don't have to take the building down. We don't have to do anything crazy. Here's a nice little horse barn. So sometimes buildings sink into the ground, they rot into the ground, and then they get pushed by the wind, which is what happened to this building. So it was 3 feet out of plumb. So we buried a bunch of dead men in the ground. We just pulled the building back into plumb while we lifted it. So even if it's leaning way over and it's sinking into the ground, and the posts look like that, because that's the wind hitting that side of the building. So obviously I do a lot of wind repair work. But sometimes joinery doesn't make sense. Sometimes taking the whole wall doesn't make sense. Apart doesn't make sense. So even got some big steel plates in here to kind of bind that post back together. That's just a shot of the roof system. And then, drop siding, Nelma pattern 105. Some people call it Dutch lap, German siding. There's a lot of names for it. Is the lower level. And then this is Falu red paint, linseed oil paint on a 90-foot long, 24-foot tall sidewall, 36-foot wide dairy barn we did. I've started to use northern white cedar for clapboard now, and the original photo. And this is a lift. This is a new foundation. And so you can see lifting here with some cribbing towers. And pretty much a whole new lower level on this building. And it's double-sided, so around the 19th century, you started to see dairy barns with 2 layers of siding on them to help keep the wind out. That's what this has. So it has 2 layers of lower siding, 1 layer of upper siding, and then it has clapboards over the top. Here's that fastener I'm talking about, $45. Incredible engineering power for holding this building down. If you're going to lift a building and put a foundation under it, use this fastener because it's cheap, easy, and masons know how to use it. Shear rings. Here's a close-up of a couple of shear rings. situations. You can see it in play here. It restores incredible capacity back to a building. Here's a stirrup strap with a shear ring. It's 1/4-inch plate steel, 3 inches wide, has something like 20,000 pounds of capacity. That's the inside of that barn, so we needed that kind of capacity with these clear span trusses. 1906 dairy barn haymow. So that's what's called mixed methodology. Steel, joinery, we're trying to make those decisions in all the projects that we're doing when we lift them. This happens to be the finished photo of that building. Here it is being lifted. And here are these lateral connectors. Almost all the time when we work on buildings, we come back in and put lateral connectors in. This is a pretty stout barn. Some are not so stout. Some buildings sort of face the wrong way, and the gable walls just get smacked by the wind constantly. They're vibrating in and out. Long ago, 1850 and prior, this tie beam might be what's called a bellied tie beam. It might stick out 16 inches in the center. It might be shaped like this. And the reason for that is because these walls absorb either a lot of outward thrust from hay or grain, or a lot of thrust from the exterior, which is from the wind. This one's upsized to a 10 by 10, while these plates are 8 by 8s. So these guys knew that. They knew that this tie beam needed to be larger. People forgot that over time, and so we end up having to reinforce it. They forgot it when they built this building. They forgot that this is supposed to be a bigger piece. So what we do is we put these lateral connectors in to reinforce the gable wall because it's constantly getting smacked by the wind. It's constantly vibrating, or the haymow door opening is so big that there's not a lot of framing in there. So quickie, this is a real quick 2 slides, but it just shows how minimal the work we can do is. Sometimes it's just coming in and meeting ADA code so that there isn't a trip hazard greater than 1/4 of an inch. And that's what we did. That's all we did on this job besides put shingles on the side of that dormer. We made the whole floor public access by putting in thresholds like that, because it's about trying to make these buildings usable and accessible so that people go in them and we can save them. So here's a little update of Littleton. That's the round barn at Littleton, or Littleton's round barn. So we can see, so we do scans now during our assessment process. We scan the buildings. You can see that the side of the roof here has been flattened out by the wind. And here's our repair system. We've added another round of lower connectors at Littleton. We've also added shear walls in the basement in the old stalls. And we've added chevron bracing up around the perimeter. So where we're at with that job right now is putting chevron bracing around the perimeter, and we're getting ready to put this band of lateral connectors into the derrick. That's as it looked before. Here's another image of the scan which shows it in plan. Also shows some rotten sill plate damage. But the scans are what I wanted you to see. We have scanning technology now. It's so easy that we can come in and scan these buildings with such accuracy that I don't have to use a tape measure. And we can take that back. We can do all the engineering as needed from those scans. We can develop 3D models from it. We can create the plan that we're going to use to reinforce the roof system from these scans. It's really critical and important on these bigger buildings. Because to climb around that whole building with a tape measure, it's a 100-foot span. It takes weeks. I mean, when I used to come and do buildings like this 30, 25 or so, 28 years ago, when I first started documenting them, I would show up with my folding chair and my little table and my ruler and my 3 tape measures, and I'd sit here for 2 days and draw the thing. And now we scan the whole building in 3 hours, and we have super accurate stuff that already is exported into AutoCAD. This is the level of technology that we're getting to with restorations that's so important in making them doable. Okay, so I breezed through that as fast as I could. Questions?